evening and welcome to Current Issues. I'm your host, Hesham Tillawi. Welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight, we're going to have a busy night again. In the first hour, we'll be speaking with Toensing. He's the editor of Middle East Report and the director of the Middle East Research and Information Project. We're going to speak with Mr. Toensing to see what is the future store. What does it store for us in the Middle East and in the world? And in the second hour, we'll be speaking with Mark Dankoff, ordained clergyman, Lutheran clergyman, who will be speaking about, again, we're going to tackle the Christian Zionism again. And why is it important that we talk about this stuff, ladies and gentlemen? Because people are dying. Just as simple as that. Because people are dying and you need to know what's going on in the world. You know, it's amazing how the media covers things. Before we jump into the program tonight, I wanted to share with you a story out of New York. A woman who was a jeweler, she left about 31 diamond rings in a cab, in the trunk of a cab. And the guy found the rings, and what he did, you know, you would think 31 diamond rings would probably make him a millionaire, but he took him back. He went back, he tracked back down the woman, and he gave him back to her. We have his picture, I think it's picture number 2. And the reason I'm telling you this, because this gentleman here is a Muslim. Now, I don't know if you heard about this story or not, but the only thing they did not say in the media, they did not say that he was a Muslim. Now, if this guy would have stolen a purse or a loaf of bread, it would have been a Muslim stole that loaf of bread. But because this gentleman, he took back 31 diamond rings, and when they interviewed him, he said, I don't want to get rich on somebody else's money. If I want to get rich, I'm going to make it on my own. Now, they didn't say he was a Muslim. They did not. And my point to you is, the media is playing with your mind of how to look at Muslims. Now, I think this man deserves to be labeled as a Muslim because he did it because of his religion, and he said so. On the other hand, sometimes I receive emails from friends and foes at the same time, and it's about Muslims. And the way, you know, there's a friend of mine sent me an email, I think it was either today or yesterday, and this long letter by someone who is going on and on about how Muslims, and it's their religious duties to kill us all, or we are to convert to Islam. And, you know, if you receive any of these emails and you forward them to all of your friends, you're really committing a sin here. Because this hatred that you are fueling when you do this, and you don't even know what you are reading, if what you're reading is true or right or not. Just somebody bashing Muslims and saying that they are going to come over here and kill us, and we all are going to have to be Muslims. Let me just remind you, and you really need to go and understand Islam. You really need to, because if you are going to be the cause of spreading this false news, you are being used as an object in whoever's hand that is playing this game, that is designing this game, that is wanting you to actually hate people just because they're telling you, we want you to hate these people. Number one, let's remember, Islam is the only religion after Christianity that recognizes Jesus. Muslims are ordered, it's one of their pillars of faith to believe in the Bible, in the message of Jesus, in the Injil. In Arabic it's Injil. Jesus is mentioned 25 times in the Quran. Muslims have ruled Christian countries for 500 years and did not force any Christian to convert. The Quran tells Muslims no coercion in religion. No coercion. That means you cannot coerce people to convert to Islam. In Jerusalem, ladies and gentlemen, the second caliph, who was like the third person, the second person to come after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he went to Jerusalem, and when it was time for prayers, now Muslims, if they can't find a mosque, they will go and perform prayers at a church. There's no problem with that. It's considered a house of God. Now it's true, there are differences, but Muslims and Christians and Jews, I might add, they look at the same God. These three religions, all three religions recognize Abraham as the father of those religions. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They're the only three religions in the world that go back to Abraham, and that they look at God in the same way and they worship the same God. Now when you hear these people speaking on the internet, you would think Muslims, they believe in something totally different. They're not. And the church, ladies and gentlemen, that when the second caliph, Omar, when he was in Jerusalem and it was prayer time, his friends and his companions, they said, hey, there's a church, let's go and pray in it. Now he could have, but he said, no, I'm afraid if I go and pray in this church that Muslims will make it a mosque after me. So he did not. He refused, and he went across the street and prayed in the open, and now there is a mosque there that is called Omar Mosque, in reference to Omar, the second caliph. Now, do you know what church that is, ladies and gentlemen, that I'm speaking of? It's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Now, you know, if Omar would have prayed in that church, and the Muslims made it into a mosque after that, but he did not. Because Muslims respect Christianity. So when you receive some of these emails, if you don't know what that email is saying, or if it's bashing Islam and you don't know much about Islam, go and read. Go and read the Quran. The Quran is the best source for you to learn about Islam and about Muslims. And if you don't know a Muslim, go and visit one of those Islamic centers. There's a lot of them around the world. Just walk in. Walk in and ask anyone, I would like a copy of the Quran in Arabic, in English. They will be more than happy to help you with it. Whenever you receive some of these emails, ladies and gentlemen, that are bashing Islam, send it back and say, remove me off your list. Because I don't need this hateful and hatred emails to be on my computer. Anyhow, like we said, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we are going to be speaking with Chris Toensing. He's the editor of Middle East Report and director of the Middle East Research and Information Project. Toensing has written for the Los Angeles Times, The Nation, The Progressive, and U.S. newspapers and magazines, and has appeared hundreds of times on radio and TV programs to discuss Middle East politics. He holds an MA in Near Eastern Studies from Princeton University. He does speak Arabic. He's an Arabic speaker. And Toensing lived in Egypt for 3 years. Before we go to Chris, ladies and gentlemen, I'm finding that we have a new comedy channel on the on cable. It's called C-SPAN. I really was laughing It's amazing. This is probably was one of the most boring channels probably to a lot of people, because you don't want to sit there for hours and hours listening to talking heads just talking. And but I was watching a debate in Congress, and you start wondering, are these people who are in Congress, do they live in the same country that we live in? Are they seeing what we're seeing? Because it's like the American people are way ahead of Congress when it comes to the war, when it comes to what's going on in the world. But these people in Congress, and it was so laughable that one of them was saying, and he was debating something, he was saying, oh, well, now we know that Saddam did not have weapons of mass destruction. And then a little later he goes, now we know that he did not have links to Al-Qaeda. And I'm sitting there, ladies and gentlemen, thinking, where were you 4 years ago when we went to war against Iraq? You knew this stuff. We talked about this stuff in 2001. Now, if we knew this stuff, and we told you about this 4 years ago, ladies and gentlemen, your congressman knows a hell of a lot better, more than we do. And also, there was a hearing, a Senate hearing, I think it was the Armed Services hearing with Carl Levin, Senator Carl Levin of he's the Democrat from Michigan. And there was a report from the Inspector General of the Pentagon saying that there may have been a misinformation given to our highest levels of government by Douglas 5. And I'm thinking, and also the report said, even though there was no laws were broken, but this is a guy, and we talked about Douglas 5, ladies and gentlemen, for the last 4 years. We told you he was the head of the Office of Special Plans. They concocted all this stuff about the uranium and nuclear and why we need to go to war against Iraq and remove Saddam Hussein. We told you who Douglas 5 is, but now the Inspector General says, oh, there was no laws broken, even though our intelligence services that are costing us billions and billions of dollars told the President that this guy is out of his mind, Douglas 5. As a matter of fact, Tommy Frank said he called him the most stupidest guy that he had ever seen. He broke the law, and these people need to come, and we need to bring him into a court of law to answer for all these hundreds of thousands of people that have died in Iraq, the 3,000 and some that we have lost, and all the families that have been destroyed because of this guy's lies, because he had an agenda, and we have told you about that agenda. We're not going to go through with that again. Let me go to my guest who is patiently waiting, and Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
I have to apologize in advance. I have a little bit of a cough, and so you may have to bear with me if I have to excuse myself and have some water or something. But I'm hoping to make it through the interview.
Sure, no problem. Chris, I want to know what's going on in the world now, and where are we going from here? I mean, are we, and again, you heard me talking about the hearings in Congress. I mean, are these guys, do they live in America or do they live somewhere else? What they're trying to investigate, it's been out there. They knew it before we even went to war against Iraq, and now they're acting like, oh, let's do an investigation. What's going on?
Well, I think you're right that the American people are pretty far ahead of Congress on the issue of the war. There's a poll out today that says that 63% of Americans want all American troops, not just some, but all, to be home in the United States by Christmas time, by the end of this year. So that's a lot earlier. That's a lot, date certain, that's a lot earlier than the earliest ones we've heard coming from Congress. That Senator Barack Obama has recommended that soldiers be brought home by 2008. Other people are talking about sometime in 4 to 6 months. But the American people, by and large, have concluded that that this war is a defeat in terms of its original purposes. That there is now a civil war in Iraq in which the U.S. is is powerless to stop, and in which it's actually an active participant, and that the United States simply has no business continuing this war any longer. And it is very disappointing to see how slow the Congress is to appreciate these realities and to act upon them.
Okay.
And I think that the basic reason for it is that part of it is partisan politics. The Democrats want to be sure that this disastrous war is sort of an albatross that is hung around the neck of the Republican Party and the Bush administration in particular for all eternity, and they're loath to make any sort of concrete policy on Iraq because that makes it their war as well as the Republicans, and they don't want to be blamed by history and by the public opinion for what disasters may happen in the future. But part of it is, and I think this is the real reason for the paralysis among the politicians, is that excuse me, that this war was fought for strategic reasons. It was fought to gain a beachhead at the head of the Persian Gulf, which is where 2/3 of the world's proven oil reserves are located. And it was fought to gain new permanent bases for the U.S. military in that oil-rich region. That is viewed by the bipartisan foreign policy establishment in this town as one of the key pillars of U.S. Superpower status in the world. And both the Democrats and the Republicans appreciate that if there were to be a U.S. withdrawal from Iraq before some kind of predictable and pliable Iraqi government had been able to maintain control over the entirety of the country, then that would be perceived accurately as a retreat under fire. And it would make people in Europe, Japan, elsewhere question whether the U.S. is prepared to continue with its role that it's served since really the end of World War II as being the sort of Praetorian Guard for the world's oil supply. And, so they're thinking in these big, grand strategic terms that are quite removed from the sort of daily life realities of the military families here in the United States who are losing their loved ones and are seeing their loved ones stretched to the limit by sort of backdoor draft. And these concerns are certainly very far removed from the realities for Iraqi civilians who have, as you mentioned, borne the brunt in every way of this war since it was launched.
Chris, can you tell me what was the strategic reason or reasons of why we went to war against Iraq? You mentioned something about military, but I mean, if the Congress wants to bring the troops back and the American people wants to bring their troops back, that means we went there, we killed 650,000 people according to some estimates, and we haven't accomplished anything. So why did we go there to start with?
Well, I think that the reason, as I said earlier, was to establish a sort of beachhead in the Persian Gulf, at the head of the Persian Gulf.
So we're going to be there forever?
Yeah, certainly, U.S. strategy in the Middle East since the time of FDR and intensifying in the Carter administration with the declaration of the Carter Doctrine, the 1980 State of the Union address, the U.S. has long thought that its most important strategic goal in the region is to ensure the westward flow of oil at reasonable prices. And
Chris, let me stop you here for a second. Did we have a problem with Middle Eastern oil going to the West or the prices? Did we have any problems before that?
No. The idea was that I'm sorry. The flip side of the Carter Doctrine is that challenges to U.S. hegemony in the Persian Gulf, whether from other countries aspiring to be superpowers like Russia and China, or from regional powers like Saddam Hussein's Iraq or like Iran today, that could challenge the United States or its allied states in the region. That is what the idea in this town is that the U.S. has to prevent the rise of other countries that would seek to dominate the oil supply.
Okay, Chris.
And so that's what the Iraq War was about.
Well,
it was an attempt to remove a regime of that of Saddam Hussein, which in the past had shown ambitions to dominate the region through its invasion of Kuwait and other things, and which the neocons feared might in the future assert a claim to regional dominance.
Now, Chris, we removed Saddam from Kuwait when basically, I mean, April Glaspie, she could have told him, no, don't go because we can come and get you, but she didn't. But also, you know, Iraq, when we went and invaded Iraq, Iraq had lost 500,000 children due to malnutrition, and the embargo for 12 years probably sent Iraq back to the Stone Ages. So, and also, our intelligence services said at that time that Iraq is not a threat to the United States. So, I don't understand what you're saying. I mean, Saddam Hussein was just sitting like a nice little boy who was told to go sit in the corner.
Well, I certainly agree with you. I'm not describing my worldview. I'm describing the worldview of Cheney, Rumsfeld, and those who think like them, those people who ordered the war. I agree that there was absolutely no threat posed by Saddam Hussein's regime to U.S. national security, and there was really no threat posed to U.S. strategic interests by Saddam. He was, as you said, his regime had been under the most crushing economic sanctions ever imposed on any country for 13 years at the time of the invasion. The country was half occupied from the air in the form of the no-fly zones in the north and the south. And certainly his conventional military strength was a shadow of his former self. And as we now know, there were no operative programs for unconventional weapons at all.
Well,
so no, Saddam Hussein was not a threat to anybody, except of course his own people before the war.
Okay, which brings us to what is happening at the Senate with these hearings. Carl Levin, he's a Democratic senator from Michigan, the Armed Services Committee or something, they are saying that maybe Douglas Feith had something to do with it. He gave the wrong information to the right people, and that's why we went against our own intelligence services. Tell me about that. What's going on now in Congress when it comes to Douglas Feith?
Well, it's a belated attempt on the part of Congress to investigate the very shady intelligence, cherry-picking of intelligence that was done before the war in order to demonstrate two things. Number one, that Iraq had operative programs for weapons of mass destruction, and number two, that Iraq had some kind of links with Al-Qaeda, and both of those things we now know to be false. But as you mentioned, we had a pretty good, very, very good idea before the war that those things were false. Certainly, the links to Al-Qaeda were so suspect before the war that, if you recall, that the Bush administration itself did not make that allegation explicitly. They hinted at it. They sort of used the words Saddam and Al-Qaeda in the same sentence many times. They hinted that Iraq had something to do with the September 11th attacks, but they never actually explicitly made that case, and that's because they knew they didn't have any evidence for it. The very, very thin evidence that they did have came from Douglas Feith's Office of Special Plans, which got hold of what's called the raw intelligence, the actual data that's collected by the intelligence community, the CIA, the DIA, and other agencies, and they ignored the analysts in those agencies who said that there's nothing in this raw intelligence that's worth looking at, and they took the raw intelligence and they cherry-picked from it every single wire interceptor or any other piece of information that they could use to prove or make an argument that there were some
Now, Chris, isn't that cheating, and isn't that lying, and isn't that breaking the law?
It certainly is. I'm not sure. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not sure if there was any specific U.S. statute that was broken by that practice of cherry-picking the intelligence. However, on the big question, the question of launching the invasion in the first place, the launch of the invasion was an illegal act in a couple of important ways. First of all, it violated the UN Charter, which says that preemptive wars are only to be launched in two circumstances: when the country A has been attacked by country B, or when country A has been informed of an imminent attack upon it by country B that it has to preempt. And that was not the case with Iraq. So, and Article 7 of our Constitution says that international treaties are the supreme law of the land. So therefore, launching the war, as the Bush administration did, a preventive, not even a preemptive, but a preventive war, was illegal both from the international legal point of view and from, it was unconstitutional. It violated Article 7 of our Constitution. And it was a massive failure on the part of our entire political establishment, and in particular Congress, to fail to hold the administration to that very clear legal standard for when you can and cannot go to war.
Very good. Chris, stay with me. We're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back.
All right.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are speaking with Chris Toensing with the Middle East Report. Chris, let's jump to what's going on now with Iran. When Robert Gates took office, one of the first things that he has mentioned, and I quote, he said, "Nobody wants another conflict in this region. My view is that there are many courses of action available that do not involve conflict with Iran. There is no need for that." And then later on, he goes, "Frankly, right at this moment, there is really nothing that Iranians want from us. And so in any negotiation right now, we would be the supplicant." And then not long ago, he said, "I think that our difficulties have given them," talking about the Iranians, "a tactical opportunity in the short term, but the United States is a very powerful country." What are we telling the world? These are confusing and conflicting statements from Robert Gates. What are we telling the world here?
Well, I think what we're telling the world is that we're trying what the Bush administration is trying to do is blame Iran for the failure of its project in Iraq. And they may be trying to soften up world opinion and American opinion for some kind of military strike on Iran, targeted at its nuclear research facilities and possibly other facilities. I still very much hope that that is not going to happen, and I am skeptical that the U.S. actually plans to attack Iran, but there certainly is every appearance right now that the U.S. is trying to soften up world opinion for some kind of preemptive attack on Iran. The content of what Gates said is that that Iran doesn't want anything from the United States is, of course, completely false. The Iranian regime wants one thing very, very badly from the United States. It has wanted it for a long time, and that is recognition of the Islamic Republic, that the Islamic Republic is here to stay. And they want the U.S. to essentially end its leadership of the international isolation that the Islamic Republic has been in since the revolution in 1979 and the hostage crisis. And they want, in the end, they want full and normal ties, diplomatic, commercial, and otherwise, cultural, with the West, and in particular with the United States. They correctly understand that until they have such relations, their regime will never be entirely secure, because the most powerful country in the world, the United States, regards it as an enemy. So that's what Iran wants. That's if Iran is pursuing a nuclear weapon, and there's no proof that they are, but if they are, the reason why they would be pursuing it is as a deterrent to the same kind of regime-changing war that was launched in Iraq. If they're pursuing a weapon, it's not about Israel; it's about the United States. There is something that the U.S. has to give in negotiations with Iran, and there's a lot that the U.S. has to get from real talks with Iran that get to the core issues that have separated the two countries for so many years.
Chris,
Iran would get relief from its international isolation, and the U.S. would get one less enemy in the region, and that would be beneficial for all concerned.
Okay. If we look at a map of Iran, we will see that it's kind of sandwiched between Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, with the pipeline project of Yonikal, that is supposed to go from Afghanistan all the way across Iran and Iraq and all the way to Haifa, do you think that has anything to do with what's happening now?
Well, I do think that historically, Iran's the pipeline politics have been a part of U.S. policy toward Iran, in the sense that these very complicated routes that have been devised for pipelines from Central Asia to Turkey and elsewhere in the Mediterranean have been proposed because the U.S. does not want to build pipelines through Iran, because they want to use, in essence, pipelines as a way to enforce Iran's isolation. And yes, oil and gas, as with Iraq, are a central part of U.S. policy toward every country in the Persian Gulf, including Iran. The U.S. regards Iran the same way that it regarded Saddam Hussein's Iraq, as a potential regional hegemon in the Persian Gulf, a country that could challenge the U.S.-friendly regimes like Saudi Arabia, and could challenge the U.S. Military presence itself in the Gulf, for some kind of hegemony over those oil and gas resources, which are the lifeblood of the world economy. And so that does, that sort of core geostrategic thinking does underpin every action that is taken by the U.S. With regard to Iran. Okay.
So now, talking about the challenging, the United States in the region and challenging some of the other powers, Gates also mentioned, and he said that our Arab friends tend to see Iraq in the context of the new challenge from Iran. That's clearly the Saudi perspective. So the secretary was able to reassure them that we want an Iraq that is a barrier against Iranian expansionism. We had an Iraq that was a barrier for Iranian expansionism, and even went to war against Iran for 8 years for that same purpose, that we were afraid that the Khomeini regime and revolution was going to spread over to the other areas in the Middle East. And Iraq was basically the one who stopped that, supposedly, that stopped that the spread of that revolution. Now we go there, we break up Iraq, we send it into a tailspin of God knows where it's going, and Iran has a much bigger hand in Iraq. It seems like our strategists, whoever are working our strategies, is completely the opposite of our national interest. So it is not benefiting us at all of what we have done in Iraq. Period. Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree from the national interest standpoint, if you posit that Iran is and always will be an implacable enemy of the United States in the region, then yes, the Iraq War, the removal of the Taliban, the removal of Saddam Hussein, and certainly the state of Iraq today have been very beneficial to Iran and its sort of its standing in public opinion in the Islamic world, and also its regional stature. So yes, Iran, if we can, pinpoint anybody who you could argue has won anything as a result of the Iraq War, you'd have to say that Iran has done so. But I want to question the premise of that question a little bit, which is I don't think that it's written in stone that Iran and the U.S. have to be implacable enemies. I think that's something that's constructed by the U.S. for its own purposes, and I would like to see a rapprochement between the countries and a recognition of common interests.
Okay. Now, let's go back to Douglas Feith and his relationship with Israel. What does Israel, do you think Israel had anything to do with the breakup of the Saddam's regime?
The state of Israel directly? No. I think that some of the people arguing for the war inside the vice president's office in particular, and some of the neoconservative intellectuals who argued for the war, did think that the war would be good for Israel, did think that by taking down an Arab state which had in the past been had a quite powerful conventional military, that they would be removing a potential rival of Israel's. But I don't think that logic was decisive for the real decision makers in the Bush administration, who would be, of course, the president himself, and also Cheney and Rumsfeld.
Okay, let's talk about those decision makers. Those decision makers were Vice President Cheney, Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, Richard Pearl, Douglas Feith, and others. And I'm sure you are familiar with, even before the clean break document, there was a document back in 1982 that was translated by Israel Shahak called the Israeli Strategy in the 1980s, which basically it took every Arab country and said we can destroy these countries from within. They have identified some fault lines within these Arab countries, and Iraq was one of them, and they said Iraq can be split into three, maybe four different states according to those fault lines. And also then we come to the clean break document, Strategy for Securing the Realm, that was written by Richard Pearl and others for Netanyahu back in 1996, and in it they said that removing Saddam Hussein is an Israeli strategy objective within its own right. If we go back to 1992, when Paul Wolfowitz and Richard Pearl were working for Dick Cheney, they wrote the policy guidance, the Defense Policy Guidance Report, which basically did the same thing what the strategy for Israel in the 1980s did, but they took it from an American point of view. And then in the year 2000, we have these same people writing the the project for the new American century, and these same authors, they ended up in policy-making decision-making positions in the Bush administration. So how can we say, and we know who these people are, we know their ideology, we know their connections, so how can we not say, yeah, there is a connection maybe with Israel here?
Well, I think that there is some connection with sort of historical yearnings of the Israeli right, as expressed in that clean break document. There is certainly reason to think that David Wormser in particular, who is one of the lead authors of that document and is still working in the office of the vice president as an advisor to Cheney, that he may have had that motivation himself.
What about Douglas Feith?
He may have expressed that to the vice president. Who knows? But I think the more important motivation for the people who actually call the shots, Bush, Cheney, and Rumsfeld.
I understand. But Chris,
excuse me, was about U.S. power, not
Chris,
Israel, about U.S. power.
We are showing a picture of Douglas Feith now. You know Douglas Feith, his father was in the Israeli Bitar Brigade, which was like in 1948. His mother is an Israeli. He did move to Israel and had opened up business there in Israel. And he ended up running the Office of Special Plans that basically concocted this evidence and told the president, here, go attack Iraq.
Right, and you know, Feith is another person who is credibly charged with having ideas about the Iraq War being good for Israel, and that very well may have been part or all of his personal motivation. But I think that in terms of understanding why the key decision makers, Cheney, Bush, and Rumsfeld, none of whom are neocons. They're Cold War retreads, really. And as well, I think for Paul Wolfowitz also falls into this category. The reason they wanted to prosecute this war was about strengthening their vision of strengthening American power, U.S. power. And that, I think, is the clear thrust of the project for the New American Century documents that you mentioned. And then certainly that's the clear thrust of the Defense Policy Guidance document you mentioned, and the National Security Strategy, which are all about how to maintain U.S. superpower status. And they're certainly sympathetic, all of these people, to the Israeli right. We certainly have seen that the Bush administration has been the most pro-Israel administration since Israel was created, and has adopted in many ways the viewpoint of the Israeli right toward the Palestinian issue. But I don't think that there's evidence that the crucial decision makers in the Bush administration were motivated by wanting to help Israel. I do think that they were motivated by their view of U.S. power and their view of maintaining U.S. superpower status in the region.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. I'm not going to go deeper into this because for some reason I see hesitation on your part, Chris, to really identify the real culprits here in the conflict. And
I'm not hesitant about it at all. To the contrary, I've identified very clearly who the real culprits are.
Because
it's just that you and I disagree about who they are.
That's fine. That's fine. But you do know there was an office similar to the Office of Special Plans inside the Israeli Prime Minister's office, Ariel Sharon at the time, who also bypassed his own intelligence services, the Mossad, and that office is where the yellow cake idea was concocted, and it was introduced by the Office of Special Plans. But we're going to drop that issue now. What is, okay, since you're saying this is a strategic American decision and the big guys in our government, they made that decision because it's good for us. Now, do you think we can continue?
Because they thought so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think we can continue with this? Because economically, I don't think we can keep spending the $10 billion a week or a month or on this war. So they did not really, they didn't know what the hell they were doing.
I agree. I think that the worldview underpinning the launching of the invasion was certainly arrogant in terms of its opinions about how powerful the U.S. is and can be, and was also based on a lot of mythology about the Arab world, in particular about Iraq. The people who planned the war, for instance, seem to have seriously believed that the Iraqi people would welcome invaders with sweets and flowers, and that reaction would last for a long time. and that the Iraqis might even fight on the side of the invading U.S. forces. They did not anticipate that there would be a nationalist guerrilla war, such as it has emerged, and emerged very quickly, actually, after the invasion. So yes, there was a great deal of incompetence in how the war, the decision to go to war, was formulated, and certainly in a lot of the decisions that have been made about Iraq policy since the invasion. A lot of them can be traced to incompetence and sort of blind ideology on the part of many people, from Bush on down to Paul Bremer and other people, more minor CPA officials,
Okay.
who were part of the U.S.-British occupation authority that dissolved in 2004.
Okay. Chris, stay with me. We're going to go to the phones and get some callers in. Line one, go ahead.
Yes. Is it possible that Mr. Toensing can hear me now?
I hear you.
Yeah, he heard you.
He can hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
I hear you.
Dr. Tillawi, first I want to ask Chris Toensing a question, and then I want to get to my point. Chris, in full disclosure, are you related by any chance to Victoria Toensing, the woman who's married to Joe DeGenever, who's always on the television set defending the Bush administration?
I am probably distantly related to her because, as far as we know, there's only one large family with our last name in the United States. So I probably am some kind of cousin of hers, but I've never called her to figure out what the exact relation is.
Okay, thank you very much. Now here's my question. Look, Doug Feith appeared on Fox News the other day, the Sunday show with Chris Wallace, and they read a statement that what he did, the Congress said that what Doug Feith did in the Office of Special Plans by taking intelligence and then trying to cook the intelligence to what they wanted to do for Dick Cheney, that what he did was not illegal, but it was inappropriate. Now, let me ask you a question. When people fiddle with intelligence like that, thereby causing us to go to war, in your opinion, should Doug Feith be brought up on charges? Is that an illegality to you, or is that an inappropriateness? And thank you very much.
I think that Doug Feith and Paul Wolfowitz and Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney and George Bush and everyone who was involved in the decision to go to war, and it was involved in the effort to market the war to the American public on false pretenses, as Feith clearly helped to do, and on all of them should be brought up on charges of great seriousness. They made the most important decision that an administration can make, which is to send the country into war, and they did it on false pretenses.
Would you go as far as saying
that is a clear violation of their oaths of office? And I think that certainly the top members of the Bush administration should also be prosecuted internationally for war crimes, for what has happened in Iraq as a result of their decision to invade.
Would you go as far as saying they should be brought on charges of treason?
I think there's a real legal case to be made for treason. Yes, I do. It's extremely important in our system, in our democratic system, for the people who serve in our military to know and to trust that the politicians who can order them into battle will only do so when the security of our country and security of the American people is at stake, and when military force is the only way for the United States to defend itself. And that's the contract that people sign when they go into our military. They agree that they'll go wherever the commander-in-chief sends them. But the other side of the contract is the commander-in-chief says that he will not recklessly send American men and women into harm's way. And President Bush did that. And so, yes, I do think that he violated a very, very fundamental sort of bond of trust that our elected leaders have with the American people. And yes, I do think that there probably is some kind of case to be made that that's
Chris,
an act of treason.
Very quickly, and we're going to go back to the phones again, but very quickly, how severe the harm that was done to the United States because of this war? Financially, economically, socially, reputation-wise, I mean, how big is it?
Oh, I think the costs are enormous. And certainly the financial costs are expected to be about $1 trillion before this whole thing is over, and maybe more. Just think of what could have been done with that money if we hadn't spent it in this wasteful way. The human costs are tremendous. We have not only 3,100 and counting men and women who have lost their lives, but we have over 10,000 people who have been permanently maimed, some of them in quite awful ways. We have incalculable damage that's been done to the stature and standing of the United States in the world. Just think of the damage that was done by the photos from Abu Ghraib and the blow to our reputation that involved. So yes, I think that that the costs are tremendous. I think probably
is the world any safer now than before?
The biggest foreign policy blunder in our history.
Is the world any safer now?
No, the world is less safe as a result of this invasion. Much less safe. Just look at what's happening in Iraq.
Okay.
1 out of every 7 Iraqis is either a refugee or an internally displaced person. That would be as if 75 million Americans were, had lost their homes as a result of the war.
Chris, we're going to go very quick back to the phones with Tom. We only have a couple of minutes left. Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying your guest tonight, but what disturbs me that Bush, first we were focused on Afghanistan, and we took our eye off the ball with Afghanistan, and they did the bait and switch, and we focused on Iraq. Now we're getting ready, we're looking at Iran. And I have a question for you guys and for you. I want to know what part Saudi Arabia plays in this, because if you've got the Shiites in Iran maybe hooking up with the Shiites in Iraq and then causing the Shiites in Saudi Arabia to kind of have a uproar or revolt there in Saudi Arabia, if those three things happen, what part of the oil over there will they control? And I really want to question, what is the part of Saudi Arabia in all of this? And thank you very much.
Thank you. Where does Saudi Arabia fit in all this?
Well, I think your caller put his finger on it, and that is the Saudis' main concern here is their own Shiite population, which is very heavily centered in what's called the Al-Hassa province.
Which is the eastern province.
Yeah, and that is where the bulk of the oil reserves in Saudi Arabia are located. And I believe it's still true that Shiite citizens of Saudi Arabia make up the bulk of the labor force in the oil fields. They certainly did in past times. So the Saudis are always very nervous that not just Iranian influence, but now also Iraqi Shiite influence will take root among their Shiite population and induce them to engage in some kind of revolt. Shiites in Saudi Arabia face a great deal of repression. Various kinds of Shiite religious rituals are banned. Shiites have to endure a steady stream of really vile and racist invective coming from some of the extremist Sunni clerics in Saudi Arabia, some of whom have tight ties with the regime. So this is not an irrational fear on the part of the Saudis, since the Shiites are so oppressed. But
okay. Chris, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it right there because we're completely out of time. I just want to say thank you for coming on the program.
Sure, anytime.
Thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in 5 minutes.